Justinian was a powerful emperor, but he did not rule the Byzantine Empire all alone. His wife, the Empress Theodora, was a brilliant, energetic woman who helped him make his decisions. Theodora was not always an empress. Her parents ran a circus at the Hippodrome, a huge arena in Constantinople. Her father was the circus bear trainer. Little Theodora used to sit in the warm sand of the arena and watch him work with his bears. Sometimes she fed the bears apples and honey to reward them for doing their tricks. When she grew a little older, Theodora got to work as a clown in the circus. She painted her face white and pretended that she could not speak. The audiences loved Theodora's act. Soon Theodora was acting in plays as well and attracting hundreds of fans. They came to see her shows, threw flowers to her, and applauded her performances. Theodora was a success. She got to travel all around the Byzantine Empire, staying in the best inns, eating the best food, and drinking the best wine. But one day, Theodora heard about Christianity and decided to become a Christian. That I cannot go on being an actress, going to parties every night and doing whatever I please. She thought that I need to have a different kind of life, a quiet, peaceful life. So Theodora left her job as an actress, moved to Constantinople, and became a wool spinner. She spent her days quietly making wool thread out of sheep's wool and selling it to the merchants of Constantinople. One day, Theodora was walking to the market with a basket full of yarn when she heard, make way for the soldiers of the royal army." She stepped out of the street and craned her neck to see the soldiers. Justinian had not become the emperor, yet he was still serving in the army. He was riding with the other soldiers, wearing a red cloak over his shining armor, with his sword hanging by his side. Theodora thought that he was the most handsome man she had ever seen. Justinian saw Theodora standing by the side of the road. "Who is that beautiful woman?" he asked the soldier beside him. The other soldiers only shrugged. "I must find out." Justinian thought to himself that I want to know who she is at once. After a long search, Justinian found Theodora's home. He was overcome by her beauty and charmed by her intelligence. He fell in love with her and married her. And when he became the emperor, Theodora became the empress. The two of them ruled side by side, and Justinian rarely made a decision without consulting his wife. 5 years after Justinian became emperor, the people of Constantinople rioted. They wanted Justinian to get rid of 2 men who worked for him, 2 men who were very unpopular. When Justinian refused, the crowd became more and more angry. They charged through the streets of the city, overturning merchant stalls, wrecking walls, and burning buildings. They even set fire to the Hagia Sophia. They killed policemen and gathered around the emperor's palace, shouting, "Victory, victory." Justinian was terrified. "If they break into the palace, they will kill us both," he exclaimed. "Let's leave Constantinople at once. If you run away, they will take the throne away from you." Theodora warned him. "You will never be emperor again. That's better than dying," Justinian retorted. "You can run if you want to," Theodora said. "You have plenty of money, and you can always sail away in the royal ships. But I never want to give up my royal purple cloak and my crown. How can someone who has once been emperor agree to become a wandering refugee? If you run away, you will soon wish that you had died instead." Finally, Theodora convinced Justinian to stay. He ordered his generals to lead the army against the rebels. The fight was long and hard, but Justinian's men won. Justinian kept his throne and rebuilt the damaged city. He made the Hagia Sophia even bigger and more beautiful than ever. And for the rest of his life, he was grateful to Theodora for keeping him in Constantinople. The empress had saved the emperor's throne. After the riots that nearly frightened him out of Constantinople, Justinian ordered the burned buildings rebuilt. The Hagia Sophia, Constantinople's biggest church, had been almost completely destroyed. Justinian decided to hire 2 very famous architects to design and build a new church. This new Hagia Sophia had great domes, big windows, and huge open spaces. Inside, it was decorated with paintings and mosaics. Mosaics were pictures made by arranging colored pieces into a pattern. These pieces were called tesserae. Tesserae could be made out of stone, marble, glass, wood, clay, or even gold and silver. By setting the tesserae close together, artists could make beautiful patterns. And they could even make pictures of people and animals. Some mosaics were whole scenes, like a man feeding a donkey or an emperor and his whole court. Making a mosaic was slow and careful work. First, the artist would cover the wall or ceiling with a thin layer of plaster, which was thick, white, and sticky like glue. Then, the artist would carefully and slowly begin to put tesserae into place in a shop or house. The tesserae might be little pieces of colored glass, stone, clay, or would painted different colors. But in a beautiful church or palace, the tesserae were more likely to be bits of marble or pieces of silver. The mosaics in the Hagia Sophia are especially bright and shining because the artists who made them covered glass cubes with gold and made the backgrounds of the mosaic pictures out of these glittering tesserae. Each glass cube was set into the plaster at a slightly different angle. When the sun shines on the golden mosaics of the Hagia Sophia, light bounces off the pictures in all different directions. The pictures seem to glow in the light. Many people saw the mosaics in the Hagia Sophia because this church became the center of a whole group of Christians. Remember, after the fall of Rome, many Christians in the lands that had once belonged to the Roman Empire believed that the Pope was their leader. They believed that God had given him the job of looking after all Christians. But not all Christians agreed. Those Christians who lived in Constantinople, as well as many Christians who lived in Africa, Asia, and in the eastern part of the continent of Europe, did not believe that the Pope should be able to make decisions for the whole church. Instead, they thought that the leaders of the churches in Jerusalem, Rome, Constantinople, and 2 other important cities should join together to make decisions, and that Christians everywhere would join in saying, yes, those decisions are right. This was a very different way to think about the Christian church, and as time went on, the Pope who was in the west of Europe and the leaders of the Christian church in the east disagreed more and more about how the church should be led. Finally, the Christian church divided into 2 groups. Those who continued to believe in the authority of the Pope became known as Roman Catholics. The Christians further east, including those in the Byzantine Empire, became known as Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox. Orthodox Christians called their leaders patriarchs. They had their own prayers and their own rites ways of worshiping God. The Eastern Christians liked to tell stories about Christians from the past who had been faithful to God. One of these Christians was called Nicholas. Here is one story that the Christians of the Byzantine Empire told about Nicholas. Nicholas lived in Asia Minor. His parents were Christians, but they died when Nicholas was very young, leaving him lots of money. Now, in those days, a girl could not get married unless her father gave a gift of money to her husband. In the village where Nicholas lived was a very poor family with 3 daughters. Each girl was in love with a young man and wanted to get married, but their father had no money to give them. One cold, snowy night, Nicholas was walking by the house of this poor family when he heard a girl weeping. He stopped and came closer. There in the window sat one of the daughters, crying and crying. He came even closer until he could hear what she said. The girl wept. I will never be able to marry the man I loved. My sisters and I will live here in poverty for the rest of our lives, and all because my father has no money. Nicholas could not bear to hear such sadness. He ran quickly home and gathered as many gold coins as he could find into a bag. Then he ran back through the snow to the house where the girl sat weeping. He did not want anyone to know who had brought the gold, so he drew his arm back, aimed carefully, and threw the bag up into the top of the chimney. A moment later, he heard the girl exclaim, "Look, something has fallen into the fireplace. What is it?" And he crept away, satisfied that he had given the girl and her father money enough to arrange for her wedding. But later that night, he thought, what about her 2 sisters? Suppose they wish to get married too. Who will pay the money for them? The next evening, Nicholas returned with another bag of gold. Again, he threw the bag down the chimney, into the fireplace, and the next night, he came back with a 3rd bag of gold and did the same thing. The next spring, all 3 daughters were married. They wore beautiful gowns stitched with gold and wreaths of white flowers on their heads. Their father and mother danced together with joy at the wedding feast, and Nicholas watched, happy that his gift given in secret had brought so much happiness. As time went on, the story of Nicholas was told and retold by the Christians in the Byzantine Empire. Soon, Nicholas was called a saint, a person who has a special relationship with God. The Emperor Justinian built a cathedral to honor Saint Nicholas in Constantinople, and his story spread all over the world. In many countries, children get gifts on Saint Nicholas' special day, December 6th. Sometimes, they put their shoes next to the door. In the morning, The shoes are filled with chocolate coins wrapped in gold foil to remind them of the gold St. Nicholas gave to the three poor girls. Oh, you know that St. Nicholas has another name. Sometimes he is called Santa Claus. The story of Santa Claus comes from the story of St. Nicholas, a Christian from the Byzantine Empire. If you were traveling during the Middle Ages, you might find yourself walking or riding along through very dangerous lands. Barbarian tribes had settled in many of the countries that used to belong to Rome. There was no king or emperor to keep the peace. Instead, many different war leaders ruled over little kingdoms of their own, and these war leaders were always fighting with each other. You might be riding innocently along, going to visit your cousins far away, and get caught in the middle of a battle between war bands. Or bandits might attack you and steal your horse and all your belongings. But travel in the Byzantine Empire was much safer. You could ride your horse along the roads in peace. Justinian and the other emperors made sure that their subjects obeyed the laws, and the soldiers of the Byzantine army helped protect the people from robbers and invaders. You could also feel safe traveling down into India. Like Byzantium, India had a king who ruled over a large, peaceful empire. Imagine that you decide to leave Byzantium and go east. You ride for days and days. Slowly, you begin to see a line of mountains ahead of you, mountains that seem to touch the sky. These are the Himalaya, the highest mountains in the world. Mount Everest, the tallest peak in the Himalaya, juts up almost into space. Up on top of Mount Everest, the air is too thin to breathe, and snow and ice stay on the mountains all year long. As you begin to come down the other side of the mountain range, you see villages tucked into the rocky slopes. The people who live here are tough and strong. They raise mountain sheep and make warm clothing from their fleece. You ride further south, veering a little to the west. The air grows hotter and hotter. The ground becomes sandy and flat. Your horse stumbles in the deep sand. Sweat rolls down your face. When the wind blows, sand whirls up from the ground. It gets into your mouth, your eyes, and your clothes. This is the Thar Desert, where it hardly ever rains. You decide you would better get out of the desert, so you head east again. Slowly, you begin to see trees and grass. The sand gives way to dry dirt, and then to rich, black soil. Ahead of you, you can see the blue gleam of a river. You have come to the Ganges, the most important river in India. Every year, the Ganges overflows and leaves damp, black silt all over the ground. This silt is like fertilizer. It makes crops grow. Houses are all around you. Thousands of people live here, near the river. In your journey, you have seen mountains, deserts, and river villages. But this is only a small part of India. If you were to keep on going south, you would cross over more mountains and rivers, and eventually you would come to the coast of India, where palm trees grow in tropical jungles along the edge of the sea, and where villagers hunt tigers and ride elephants. India has many different parts to it. So for hundreds of years, the Indian people lived in many small, different kingdoms. But a man named Chandragupta wanted to make all of those kingdoms into one large Indian empire. At first, Chandragupta only ruled a little kingdom near the Ganges River, but he managed to conquer a few of the little kingdoms nearby. His son conquered a few more, and his grandson conquered even more. Eventually, Chandragupta's descendants ruled over the whole upper part of India. Chandragupta had founded a dynasty. Listen to the names of some of the kings in this dynasty: Chandragupta, Samudragupta, Kumargupta, and Skandagupta. All of these kings were part of the Gupta dynasty. Under the Guptas, India became peaceful and rich. Indian poets and playwrights wrote great works in the Indian language, Sanskrit. Artists painted and sculpted in copper and iron. Scholars wrote learned books about mathematics and astronomy. Indian doctors even learned how to reattach ears and noses that had been cut off. This time is often called the Golden Age of India. But then the barbarians came. Barbarian tribes called the Huns had already attacked Rome and Byzantium. Now they swooped down into India. If the people of India had still been divided into many small kingdoms, the Huns might have been able to destroy them. But the king of India, Skandagupta, rallied all his people together into one strong army. And with Skandagupta to lead them, the Indians managed to drive the Huns away from their empire. Skandagupta's people praised him for saving them. They made coins with his picture on them. They carved his portrait into rock. Skandagupta has been embraced by the goddess of wealth and splendor, they exclaimed. India had survived the barbarian attacks. But fighting off the Huns had made India poorer and weaker. Slowly, the different parts of the empire began to divide into separate small kingdoms once more. By the year 550, the Gupta dynasty of India had come to an end. The golden age of India was over.